always love these verses, these texts that come out, and the first thing they say is, and then he went to Caesarea Philippi. You know, it's kind of like our travel log, right? It's kind of like our journey. It's our Forbes, our, visiting, what's that planet book? I forget what it's called.
Frommers.
What's that?
Frommers
Frommers or something like that. You know, we get this little travel log. And now they went to, and then they went to, and immediately left for, the Caesarea Philippi is a key word here. And again, you know, when we're reading scriptures, I always think geography means so much. Geography means so much when we're reading scriptures, right? Because you got to think about where Jesus has been. First, he was in Jewish territory, right? And that's where he fed the 5,000, right? And then he goes into Gentile territory, and he feeds 4,000. And remember the storm at sea? They had to go to the other side. So now he's between the two, right? And now he's on the edge. Now he's on the edge. Now he's on the edge between Gentile and Jewish territory. It's called Caesarea Philippi, right? So he's on the edge. And I want you to keep that in mind. I mean, I'm keeping your own minds when you've been on the edge of something. When you've been on the edge of something, you know this way or you know that way. But now I'm on the edge. What is it like to be on an edge?
Uncertain.
Uncertain.
Unnerving.
Unnerving. I love the Rumi poem. Sit down, you're drunk, and this is the edge of the roof. Right? I mean, when you're on an edge, you really have to make a decision. You have to make a decision. Right? And so, this is where Jesus is at. He's on an edge. He's on an edge. He's at Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is this ancient site. It's this ancient site. And it was basically developed by the Greeks. And important, and then later it was annexed in about 20 BC. In about 20 BC, when the Greek Empire is more or less has crumbled, they're losing their grasp all over. Basically, the city gets annexed to the kingdom of Herod the Great. And basically, when the Greeks were there, it was associated as a place of desolation. It was a place of Pan, or Pan, however you want to say it. Right? And Herod, though, goes about taking this place, he annexes it, and then he begins to do this massive capital campaign and rebuild the city. He wants to rebuild the city in many ways. And the city is so important because it's got this spring. It's got this spring that bubbles out of the limestone. And out of the limestone, then this spring basically feeds what's called the Whalum Marshes. And so this whole area is fed by this spring. And so Herod the Great begins, and he goes beautifying, creating this incredible temple out of white marble. Right? He builds this temple. Later, Philip the Tetrarch takes this city over, and he continues some of the modifications, and then he names it Caesarea Philippi. Now, if he names it Caesarea, who is he honoring? Caesar. He's honoring Caesar. And if he names it Philippi after that, who's he honoring? Himself. So Caesarea Philippi is in honor of Caesar, in honor of Philip. You know, these great kings. And so Jesus is here. Jesus is in some ways, this political capital. You get the scene? You get the scene. Jesus is in this political capital, and he's on the edge of Jewish territory and Gentile territory. And here in the shadows, lordship is questioned. Are you king of the Jews, Herod? Or are you king of the Gentiles, Caesar? Or what are you? What are you? I mean, do you get the context of the question? It's not just like, gee, what's the gossip these days? You know, you get it? He's driving home a point. He's driving home a point. He says, We've been in Herod's territory, we've been in Caesar's territory, and now push comes to shove. Who do people say that I am? And who do you think that I am? Who do you think that I am, right? He's in the middle, he's in the shadows of political power. He's in the shadows of military might. And he's asking, so who do folks say that I am? And they can't completely answer, so then he says, well, so who do you guys say that I am? Elijah? Maybe Jeremiah? Moses? Right? But who do you say that I am? But who do you say that I am? Am I the king of the Jews, or am I the king of the Gentiles, or am I the king of kings? What do we say? What do we say? I mean, there's no wonder they kind of stuttered. Right? I mean, how many of you just love to be just slammed with a question off guard? I mean, some of us can think on our feet, or pretend to. But I mean, how does it feel to be slammed with a question when you're not expecting? Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of does out there, and I think that's probably where the disciples were at. Well, okay. But the problem is, once you get a question, you feel like you've got to have the right answer. Right? I remember that when I was training with Hazel, and they give this whole test. First day of class. We're not in there 3 minutes, and they give you this test on chemical dependency. You know, I'm working with all these homeless people in Dallas. Most of them have chemical dependencies, and I'm going, oh, duh. I can't answer any of these questions. And later, the instructor goes, maybe you felt stress. Yeah? He says, you know, we give this test not because we want to know what you know, we want to know what you don't know, so we know what we have to teach. We just want to know what we have to teach, what you need to learn. And if you're always pretending you know something you don't know, we got a problem. Right? How many of us end up pretending to know things we don't know? Just Bob. Thank you, Bert. I mean, this is the question, right? This is the question. And the disciples don't know because they're not sure what to expect, because the Messiah was not a healer. The Messiah was not a wisdom holder. The Messiah was not this gentle lamb. I mean, the Messiah was a warrior. The Messiah was a warrior like Saul. The Messiah was a warrior like David. The Messiah was a warrior like Solomon. They were warriors. There were people who had military might and military strategy and military wherewithal. So now they're dealing with Jesus. And so who do people say to us? Oh, we say Messiah? Oh, that could be wrong. Could we possibly see a Messiah who is a healer and a wisdom holder and not possessed with power? I mean, who do you trust?
King of Kings.
I mean, who do we really trust? I mean, look at you break down our national budget. Who do we trust?
Nobody. Ourselves.
Oh, well, either ourselves, business, or military. Come on. And it's fear-based. You know, we're on a cusp. We're on an edge, right? How much of our budget goes to helping the poor, helping the downtrodden, so on and so forth? How much of our budget goes to the military? I mean, we're kind of on our edge ourselves. It's almost evenly divided. And maybe not so evenly. So tell me, who's your king? Is our king love-based? Is our king fear-based? Well, maybe a little both. Maybe a little both. That's fair, actually. That's really fair, because I'd say that's true. Because I'm certainly hooked by fear. I'm not trying to put this on anybody. I'm hooked by fear. I like stability. Right? And I like compassion. Aren't we hooked by both?
I think when you're uncertain, you don't know your king keeps shifting to what you're comfortable with at that time.
Oh, our king shifts. No. Right? Every 4 years. Sometimes. Right? It shifts right? Oh man, we gotta follow this agenda. Oh man, we gotta follow that agenda. Oh my God, can you believe what Bush did? Oh my God, can you believe what Obama did? Every 4 years, we're shifting kings. So if we're shifting kings, what other image do you think of when shifting? In the time of my confession. This is a Dylan song, Shifting Sands, right? No, we're always shifting. We're just shifting. And think about it. This is no different. Think about we got to think about who we put our trust in. The Israelis first put their trust in Saul, right? Samuel retires. They no longer have the judges. Saul comes onto the scene, right? They don't want judges. They want kings like the other nations. And God goes, God help us. Right? But we want kings like the other nations. So Saul is anointed. He's anointed because he beats the people at Moab. He beats the people at Edom. He beats the people at Ammon. Right? He creates this military machine. And he creates power. Right? But he doesn't obey the Lord. And why doesn't he obey the Lord? Because every time he defeats somebody, he pilfers. And he lines his pockets. That's the biblical story. Great biblical hero, right? Saul, the great pilferer. How many of us identify him like that? How many of us look and say, God, what an image for me. The great pilferer. And so he falls from grace. He falls from grace. And who comes up in his stead? David. David takes on the Philistines. He slaughters. He kills Goliath, right? He goes on. He beats Saul's son. He beats Saul's son in battle. And he unifies the tribes. He unifies the tribes, and he goes on. And they have 2 decisive battles against the Philistines, right? And then he beats them at Baal, and he beats them at Perazim, and then he goes on, he beats them at Rephaim, right? And the Philistines are no longer a threat to Israel. He defeats the Moabites, he beats the Edomites. He's a great king. And then he sends Uriah to the front. He sleeps with Bathsheba, becomes an adulterer, he murders somebody. A great hero. How many of you look at King David as the greatest hero of the Old Testament? A murderer and an adulterer. A great hero. Whoops. How many of us go, right? Oh, great King David. The Star of David. Oh, Israel could just be like it was in the time of David. You think not trusting politicians is new? Seriously? You think this is new? Right? And so David, because he murdered, because he was an adulterer, how do his 3 sons die? Old Testament history now. Quiz number 1. They die by murder. They're all murdered. Right? That which he cast now becomes part of his life. They call it the dysfunction of family systems. And if you don't address your issues, they can keep repeating themselves. If you don't address them, they keep repeating themselves. So 3 sons are murdered. And then, of course, Solomon. His son is anointed king, right? Because one brother tries to take things over, Solomon defeats him, and he becomes king, and he actually reigns while David is still alive, right? And Solomon builds the temple. He builds the temple, right? He builds this great temple, and he goes on to have 700 wives and 500 concubines. Today you would call that a sex addiction. I mean, seriously, there's another great hero. He who built the temple. And he's got a massive sex addiction. I mean, 700 wives, 500 concubines? I don't know how many. I mean, I'm never going to go there.
But he had patience.
I'm not going there either. But you see, we make these people heroes, don't we? And who do we make heroes in our lives today? Oh, we make celebrities heroes. We make our parents heroes. We make. I mean, who do we make as our? Who are our heroes today?
Is it the sports figures?
Sports figures. I mean, and who gets paid? Sports figures, celebrities. And who do we trash? Teachers, unions, nurses. I mean, who are our heroes? Who is our King of Kings? That is Jesus' question for us today. Who's the King of Kings in our lives? Jackie. Your dad and your fiance. Well, they are good kings. And I like the name, David. By the way, I like that too. And in the end, David means beloved. And David was a beloved king. And the one thing that changed his life was repentance. Right? It did change his life. It didn't change all of his destiny. It didn't take away harm. Didn't take away hurt. But it did change his direction in life. It did change his direction in life. Right? And so then we're asked, who is our King of Kings? I mean, who do you want to usher in a new era, and what kind of an era do you want to see? This is where Jesus is. He's on the cusp. He's saying, what kind of an era would you like to see ushered in? An era of peace. An era of love. An era of friendship? Did I hear friends?
Friendship.
Friends and friendship. You see what Jesus is doing? And this all comes from Caesarea Philippi. It all comes from standing on an edge and saying, what direction do you want to go? And that becomes our question, right? And then he says to Peter, I will build, and Peter proclaims him as the Messiah. That's a powerful declaration. You are different than any other king we have ever had. Your way of life, your approach is different than anybody we've had. Your approach to healing, your approach to love, your approach to grace, your approach to acceptance, your approach to the poor, your approach to the outsiders. It's so different. It's so different. That's what makes you the anointed one, the Messiah. That's what makes you the anointed one. And Jesus says, I'll build my church upon you. My church, my ecclesia. My ecclesia. And ecclesia is a fascinating term. It means the gathering of citizenship. It's a new capital. He's in Caesarea Philippi, and he's saying, on you, Peter, a gathering of a new citizenship will be founded. I mean, what kind of a kingdom would we love to be citizens of? Ecclesia is also the word that becomes church, by the way. God's kingdom. God's kingdom. You see, it's a refocusing. It's a refocusing. It's not some imperial regime. It's not some force for domination. Right? Rather, he's calling together the citizenship of spirit. And it is the spirit of love. It is the spirit of healing. It is the spirit of holiness. And it is out of that spirit that the citizenship gathers around the King of Kings, Jesus. Amen.